I going to lose everything? Will I lose everything in my divorce? That's the number one question. So you're definitely not going to lose everything in your divorce. You know, there's kind of different ways to look at this. I mean, one way to look at this is it's a partnership, just like a business partnership. You own half of everything, your wife owns half of everything. Now there's exceptions to that. So if you're in a longer term marriage, you know, let's say 15, 20, 25 years long that you're married, the likelihood at that point is most of what you have, most of what you've acquired is from during your marriage. So everything that you've acquired during the marriage, that you accumulated during the marriage, you earned it during the marriage, bought the house during the marriage, bought a car during the marriage, maybe that's paid off, has value, investments, retirement accounts, savings, whatever it might be, all that property, all the things that are in your name, all the things that have value are from during the marriage, and therefore you own all those things jointly. Now there could be exceptions. There might be something that, for example, that you inherited. Maybe you inherited some property and kept it separate and it's in your separate name. You could then keep that separate during your divorce. Or there might be a gift. Let's say your parents gave you something and you kept it in your separate name. They didn't give it to both you and your spouse. And now you're getting divorced. You might be able to keep a gift or an inheritance separate. Or there might even be something you owned prior to the marriage, even after all these years, that you've kept separate. You had a house that you owned before the marriage that you still have. You use it as a rental property. That might be a separate property then, depending on what kind of money went into it during the marriage. But in general, you're not going to lose everything. You might lose half of everything. That's certainly possible, depending on how long you've been married. Now, if you're in a shorter term marriage, it's a different set of rules. At that point, the assumption might be, well, I'm going to keep everything that I had coming into the marriage, and my spouse is going to keep everything that they had coming into the marriage, because we've only been married a couple years. Now, there might not be a prenuptial agreement. I know people don't do prenups that often. They're valid, they're enforceable in the state of Michigan. They're certainly something that you could be doing and should be doing, and if you're getting married later in life, you would definitely want to do a prenuptial agreement. But people don't do them, and then they go to get divorced a couple years after a marriage. They're in a very short-term kind of a marriage situation, and they're trying to sort things out, but they still have some advantages at that point of the idea of separate property versus marital property. Separate property in that case being property owned before you got married. So you own a house before you get married, you still own the house 3 years later, now you're getting divorced. It's your house. It's not really something that your wife is going to get half of or your spouse will get half of necessarily. They might have a claim against the money that went into this house during the marriage, or other things that maybe you did to the house. But in general, the assumption is it's your house, as opposed to the assumption being it's a house to be shared between the two of you. So this first question, will I lose everything in the divorce? You're not going to lose everything in the divorce. At the most, you'd lose half of what you have, and then there's exceptions from there.